TFM.
Welcome, Boomers, to another episode of Warp 5, our dedicated Star Trek Enterprise podcast. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. And Matthew, I'm glad you took my advice. I told you that you'd look good in some Triaxian silk, and that's quite an outfit you're wearing today.
Well, I do my best, Chris. You know, you got to look nice sometimes, and it just seemed like this was the perfect day for it.
Oh, well, definitely, because anytime I get fashion advice from an alien, I feel like my day's been made. All right, well, today we're going to talk about the episode Oasis as we continue our 20th anniversary Enterprise rewatch. And if you need a refresher for the story, here it is. In need of supplies, Archer follows a tip from an alien and finds an abandoned ship that appears to have crashed on the surface of a planet. Rumor is the ship is haunted, and the Enterprise crew soon finds out why. When more and more things don't add up, suspicions grow over how the chief engineer, Ezral, his daughter, Liana, and their crew have stayed alive on a derelict ship for 3 years. Only it has really been 22 years, and all but the father and the daughter are made of light. There's a lot of material here for Travis to work with as he crafts his next ghost story, Matthew. So let's just go on down to that miniature Imperial Star Destroyer that they spotted on the planet. Did you notice how much that thing looks like a Star Destroyer from orbit?
Yeah, it does really kind of look like some of the ships, especially that you've seen in, like, there's the Mandalorian. They use them in Star Wars Rebels a lot too. Those type of Star Destroyers, in the smaller ships. I can't remember. I'm really bad with ship designations in Star Wars, other than like Star Destroyer. But yeah, they look kind of like those type of cruisers that the Empire used. And so, absolutely, I 100% agree with you. Yeah, it was not the most unique starship design.
Right.
So basic kind of triangular type thing.
Yeah, that just stood out for me. But of course, when they actually go down to the ship, we quickly realize that it's not really that big. Mm-hmm. And then it's fine. And then when they go inside, it's like, I don't know, it kind of reminded me of Kessa's hydroponics bay on Voyager a little bit.
It did very much look like that set.
Yeah, it did. And the fact that Liana and Kess look a little bit similar reinforced that feeling. But anyway, this episode, one thing that you often hear fans say about it is that I loved this story the first time I saw it when it was called Shadowplay on DS9. And I personally don't like saying things quite that directly, but it is very true that this story is quite similar to Shadowplay. And I think the fact that we have Renee Auberjonois on here reinforces that feeling. And there's an interesting behind-the-scenes story to this, in that when they were filming it, Renee actually pointed out to Scott Bakula that, hey, you know, we did this very similar story on Deep Space Nine. And I've also heard that, like, Scott thought it was really unique. I don't know if that's true. That's something that I've read here and there before. But either way, even Renee himself obviously knew that he was playing in a story that was quite like one that he had a chief role in previously. What did you think about the similarities?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're very similar stories, and I think it doesn't help that you have a character that was in Shadowplay so in this one. So, I mean, all of that doesn't really help. You know, I think that the most interesting thing about this is it's not a terrible story here and mainly because, again, this is the crew of the Enterprise experiencing something that nobody else has ever experienced before. And I just think it's more the way that the story actually tips its hand too quickly, because Tripp says that, some of these systems remind him what you saw on the Zerillian ship. And if you're paying attention, you're going to pick up very quickly what's going on and why there's kind of this tension on this ship, because it immediately connects you to, well, what did they have that nobody else did, which is, holographic technology. And so I think that's the thing that really kind of bothered me about the episode. But I mean, I still think that there's some interesting things to say here, right? I think there's still some interesting things that they're talking about. And for these characters, again, I think it's an interesting dilemma to put them in as well.
Yeah, I think that's true if you really start to think about the situation that is going on, especially for Liana. Like you said, it is pretty easy to figure out what's going on, even if you haven't seen Shadowplay, if you're a Star Trek fan, because you're very accustomed to the holodeck. You're very accustomed to holo emitters. Holograms were a big part of Voyager, of course, with the Doctor. And as soon as they go in, even if T'Pol had not mentioned that, hey, these look like optronic emitters or technology, and Tripp had not said that, yeah, I've seen something like this before on the Zerillian ship, just visually looking at it as a Star Trek fan, you kind of realize, this looks like some kind of holographic thing going on here, which would explain why they seem like ghosts to people, because you don't get any life signs when you scan. So, but I've also heard people say that they like the fact that the episode tips its hand early, because instead of making it a rather obvious mystery, a mystery with an obvious solution, they allow the latter part of the episode to get into the more interesting part, the dialogue between Ezral and Archer, and sort of a resolution of, is what's going on good for Liana or not good for Liana? And if they hadn't tipped their hand early, and we found out at the end that these are holograms, there would have been no opportunity to really delve into that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really is one of those things, like, I just wish they kind of hadn't said that. Now, at the same time, when you think about it logically, it does make sense that Tripp would mention this, because it is a really important aspect absolutely. To the story for them. And again, it's a connection of these explorers, and what they are learning as they go. And I think all of that is really cool. And, I like that. I think more than anything, it's just really kind of the for us as fans, with us kind of having, if we're really paying attention, we are going to notice that about the story. But when it comes to the actual characters and, what they're doing and what they're experiencing, it is absolutely understandable that they would, of course, mention this, because it's a part of them trying to figure out what's going on.
Right. Yeah, that's that dilemma between in-universe and fan perception, right? Yep. Which we've talked about recently. I believe here on Warp 5, we talked about that. So, yeah, this theme, again, it's similar to Shadowplay. I also noticed that Discovery lifted the same concept in Season 3 with Su'Kal and the fact that his mother left him in the care of holograms. And that's sort of what Ezral is doing here, is leaving his daughter in the care of holograms. Not completely in the care, but I guess it is very similar. I mean, her mother is now a hologram. And is that a good thing for her or not? I think maybe we can discuss that within the context of how the crew reacts and their decision to help or not help, or maybe try to force a change. it stood out to me that Tripp in particular really felt like he knew what was best for Liana. He was very unhappy with the situation that he found her in. And spoiler alert, but this is a rewatch show, so hopefully you've seen everything. We see this come around again in the episode Cogenitor in his reactions to a situation. And it's one of those things that this time going through with a rewatch, it stood out to me in retrospect, knowing what happens later on in the series. And I noticed that in the writing, it's like, oh, they've really established this characteristic of Tripp as a character, maybe a little bit earlier than I had previously thought about. But what did you think about Tripp's reaction and this idea of him coming in as an outsider, looking at a situation where these people have established this way of life for themselves and it seems to be working for them up until now? And should he be coming in as an outsider and trying to change that with relatively little information?
I mean, I think it is a good question, but I think, Tripp can immediately see where this leads, right? And I think he makes an excellent point of, what happens when you die. And she's not really going to have a full life. She'll never have the opportunity to have a child if she wanted. She'll never have the opportunity to actually experience anything that is truly real in the sense of that physical connection. Like and I think when we think about this, Tripp is speaking to the fact that, life is more than just the mind, like the mind, body, soul connection type of idea. And so what we're getting here is something that isn't completely real because there is that actual physical nature that is missing from everybody that she interacts with except her father. And in the end, I mean, she is living a lie. And this is a lie. And so I think, to me, I didn't take it so much as Tripp challenging their way of life in the same way of Cogenitor, where it truly is like a biological reality of the way of life that they have, right? But it is still also about the mistreatment of people in their society. So it's a much more complicated question. Here, I mean, it truly does just come down to that. She says it. Have you ever had a lie that you've told yourself so many times that you begin to believe that it's true? And I think the idea of, and this is probably even more the case now than it is then, but the idea of reality distortion and telling yourself a lie so many times you begin to believe it. I think that's the thing I came away with the most. And, her father does realize that because he's actually gotten comfortable in the lie because these are the people that he knew, right? These are it is almost like having them back. And yet,
right,
that's not the same for his daughter, right? And he does realize that he is taking something away from her by not allowing her to experience new relationships and all of those type of things the same way he got to. So, I did think that, I do think that this is much more in along those lines than Tripp kind of necessarily being judgmental. And, I also don't know if it's without them being able to offer that perspective to him as as another person. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, he doesn't have these thoughts unless somebody comes in and challenges him a little bit, right? And so I don't see it as them being disrespectful or anything like that. They're just trying to say, hey, who knows when other people are going to come around again, and maybe this never happens, and maybe both you and your daughter die here without the chance of ever making another choice. So to me, it's like, we have to be able to dialogue with one another about our lives and about the world and all those things without just being like, oh, well, that offends me and I don't want to hear it. So you just shut people down.
Right.
Like that's kind of what this episode, I think, actually shows, is that the importance of being challenged, having our way of life challenged, having our thought process challenged, because you're not always going to be right.
Right. Yeah, it helped me that in the end, Ezral comes to Archer and asks for help and realizes that he should give his daughter a richer life than living in this oasis that he's created for her. If he had not done that and they had somehow, I don't know how they would have done it, but if they had repaired the ship and kind of forced them to leave, or if they had taken Liana from him and taken her somewhere else themselves, then I would have had a bit more of a problem with it. It's a difficult question. I think all your points are great ones. And sometimes in Star Trek, and this is a moment where maybe this story has a TOS feeling to it, in that Star Trek often in the past, TOS, TNG would go in and tell an alien culture that this is how you should do things, because this is the right way to do it, and the way that you're doing it is wrong, and so you need to change. And part of this episode felt that way to me in the reactions, but in the end, it's a much more personal thing here. And as a father, I can see how Ezral came to the realization that the situation that he had put his daughter in was not the best one for her, and then he decided to change it. So in the end, it played out in a positive way for me as well. But I think it does ask interesting questions about communication, dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, respecting the choices of others, and such. And those are things I don't always remember about this episode until I rewatch it, and then I get to that dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's always going to be that desire, and should be a desire for us to, respect others or whatever, but we also have to be able to have conversations where we also respectfully disagree, right? And
right,
I'm a believer in that, not all things can be true, because that's not what the word means. So there are going to be things that are true, and then there will be things that will be untrue, and helping each other figure that out is really important. And that's where dialogue comes in. That's why it's so important for us to not shut each other down, but have these conversations together. And literally what they are living in is untrue. It's just an illusion. This episode was probably should have been better named almost, and the problem is give us away, but illusion, because that's really what they're living in is a false reality. And so that would have been a great name for the episode, although again then it would have given away the whole thing from before exactly
watching. As soon as the title came on screen,
or Mirage might have been a better might have been an interesting title too. So but
maybe it would have been. So one thing, just to clarify, so Liana's understanding of the environment that she's living in, the ship crashed when she was very young. Her father, being an engineer, recreated the crew. He says first her mother, and then he recreated the others. Now, how aware is Liana of the fact that she's living among holograms?
I mean, at least from my understanding of the episode, she got what was going on, and that's why her dad was so afraid that she was going to tell that. And I think it, for her, she doesn't know what she's missing until she's faced with what she's missing, right? Which is the ability to connect with another person that is actually real, and especially, with Tripp, who is of the opposite sex, which I mean, that has whole other connotations to it about the development of a person and the ability to, have romantic relationships and partner relationships that last a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that's kind of the beauty of the story here, and the thing that probably works the best is the relationship between Tripp and Lyanna, because the actors have great chemistry together and it's very natural. And again, I think, Tripp is worried about whether or not people think he's not being a gentleman, but really he is just being a complete gentleman and being very caring towards this person. And I think there is kind of like this, I don't know, I don't want to say big brotherly or, but there is this worry about what is best for this person. Like, he truly does care about what's best for people. And that comes out in this episode, I think, really well. And it's just something that I feel like comes very naturally to Connor Trinneer as an actor.
Yeah.
And it just kind of exudes from him. And I think that's also what helps the episode feel like, yes, even though I have seen this before, it works better than it should because of the performances that we get.
Yeah. Yeah, there is sort of a big brother caring nature to it. Not Big Brother as in Orwell, but that like caring nature comes through. Of course, T'Pol needles him about, here you go again. You meet an alien girl, and it really feels like they're writing jealousy into T'Pol at this point with regard to Tripp.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really the case, but it starts to come across that way. I can't tell if she's picking on him, if she's being serious, if she's feeling jealous. You could read it in all those ways, but this thing keeps coming up.
Yeah.
With her, with regard to Tripp and Archer.
Well, and I mean, I think that's a good point, is that there is this underlying current that just kind of continues to build with them as characters. We already know that they have a closer relationship, specifically because Tripp does know some very personal things about her. And I think the last episode and this episode have both kind of showed that T'Pol is just becoming more comfortable in her relationships with these human beings. And in some ways, I think even just with the way that she responds in slightly more human ways than she has before, they are influencing her.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a nuance in the writing as well as the acting with T'Pol that goes unnoticed sometimes.
Yeah.
How she just very gradually becomes more human. It's not so much like we're going to write her and make her more human. It's just like little bit by bit.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. I think it again, that comes down to Jolene's performance. And I think you are 100% right, and people not really giving her due, because this playing Vulcans in the first place is difficult.
Yeah.
But playing them with, I think, the type of nuance that we do get from her as we move forward in her story, I think is really important. And so, and it's fun to watch. And I think part of that is it's fun to watch because we do know where these characters are going. But yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's one of the things I think I enjoy about Enterprise in general is just that I think this cast might be one of the most likable because all the people just seem so wonderfully easygoing and genuine. I love that scene where they're walking, to the turbo lift, and he's like, "Let's go, Travis, you're driving." There is, I mean, it just works. So, I think it's great. I just, yeah. And, so I give high marks to everybody on this episode with their acting. And even though this might not be my favorite episode of the season, I still think there's good things about it.
Yeah, I would agree. Rewinding, you mentioned how Liana doesn't know what she's missing until she's exposed to it. It was interesting that they chose to have her eat vanilla ice cream. You picked the most basic flavor of ice cream, and she's incredibly impressed by this. And then Tripp tells her, yeah, there's hundreds of other flavors. So not only does she not know what she's missing, but when she's exposed to the most basic of something, a vanilla ice cream, already that's like a revelation to her. Just the choice of that. You know, she didn't have one of Troy's chocolate sundaes or something. It was just the most basic thing possible.
Yeah. Well, and then I love that, you know, she asks about the idea of like a rocky road, you know, what does that mean? You know, and Tripp's trying to explain to her, well, I think they call it because it has nuts in it. Like, you know, we don't really think about those things. So I think the whole part of their relationship of her kind of being able to come out of her shell and kind of understand that, yes, this is like she knew intellectually that it's a larger world out there.
Yeah. What
she didn't know is what it would be like to begin to experience that for herself. And in some ways, I mean, this episode, when you think about it, kind of feels like the idea almost of the Matrix in the sense that she actually knows she's in a simulation, but she doesn't understand what that truly means until she's confronted with the reality of the fact that her simulation is so limited in its ability to let her experience a full life.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was thinking about does she know or not know, I'm thinking like over the course of her life. Like at what point did she come to understand the situation? And,
I mean, that's a good question of when her dad actually told her.
Yeah, or if he told her, or if she figured it out, or she figured it out and then later he revealed it to her. You know, it's not really part of the episode. You know, clearly in the episode, she knows what's going on because she saves everybody by pulling the things out and getting rid of the holograms that were attacking. But I'm just thinking if she was young, a very small kid when the crash happened, and if they've been there for 22 years, but she looks like she's early to mid-20s, character's supposed to be, so she be very small. You know, at what point did she find out? And you talked earlier about if you tell yourself a lie enough times, you come to believe it's reality. And for her, maybe she knows that she's living with holograms. She knows it's a simulation, but in her mind, it's not. It's become real. She's accepted this as the real world, which I think would probably be a natural thing for you to do because if that's all that you've known and it's your everyday reality after that long, it probably would be, which again goes back to your Matrix reference, right? Most of the people in the Matrix have no idea that they're in a simulation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the thing here that I'm sure pushes it over the edge for her father to make the decision that he does, right? Which is to make the choice to leave and to go back to their homeworld, because if it was him, he would just live out his life in this way and it would be fine. But he knows for her, this is not what's best for her. And he's confronted finally with the fact that the illusion is not reality. And so, and she deserves a life lived in reality. And she spent most of her life, over 20 years, right? Like, I don't know. I'm just really struck by, obviously this would be a difficult decision to make, but I don't think her father really had a choice in the end, if he's really thinking about what's best for his daughter.
Yeah, after the encounter with the Enterprise crew, had he decided to continue the charade, I think it would have weighed on him very heavily. And if he turned down assistance to repair the ship, then it would have really weighed on him, but he would have had no way to resolve the situation. So he kind of had to make the decision. I think as a parent, my feeling is, I would have to make that decision in that situation. All right. Well, anything else about the story that you want to mention in terms of anything else that we see, any of the other characters, Travis and his love of ghost stories? I just picture him like, using this to create a great story that he will one day tell alongside a campfire. Maybe alongside a campfire where they're also roasting marshmallows, and Tripp finally figures out what those things are all about. Because when Tripp mentioned marshmallows, I had a flashback to Star Trek V and the marshmallow scene.
I thought what was really interesting to hear is the fact that, they are on this planet, which seems like a nice planet. They are confined. They are confining themselves to this ship because the holograms can't leave. And so they have the ability to actually experience some life beyond this, and yet you're willingly confining yourself to this tiny little place. And so I just think, to me, that's a interesting choice to kind of think about, willing confinement, and I'm grateful that they make the decision to break out of that, because I can't imagine, I guess we can all imagine after COVID and lockdowns and everything, being stuck inside the four walls of our houses for so many, but I can't imagine doing that for like more than 20 years.
Right. Unless you don't realize that there's any other alternative. That's the twist to the story, right? That for her, even if she knows that she's living in this imaginary world, she doesn't know what's beyond the walls.
Sure.
And that does change the perception a bit. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've covered all the key points that I want to talk about in this episode. So any final thoughts, ratings? I did want to point out, it's interesting that Star Trek Magazine, when they did their ultimate rankings, they gave this episode 3 out of 5. And I can understand that, because as we're discussing, even though it does feel like a rehash of Shadowplay and other stories that we've seen in Star Trek, and even beyond that, things like Forbidden Planet, The Tempest, this kind of theme is nothing new. The overall story actually works out pretty well, and it does raise questions, makes you think, which is what Star Trek is supposed to do. But Brandon Braga on the Blu-rays and those extras, he said it's a terrible episode. Of course, he's also one of the writers of the stories. Maybe he's just being hard on himself. But anyway, what are your last thoughts and your rating?
I mean, this is tough because, as we've been talking about it, I don't, and I didn't hate rewatching it or anything. I just think it's an episode, right? And so for me, I would say it's probably 2.5 out of 5. I think it's half a good episode, because there are some interesting ideas, even though the story has been done before in Star Trek, and yet there's not anything else to make it above average, like it's just average Star Trek episode. So, we have some great acting and some nice character moments here and there, but overall it's an episode.
Yeah, it's an episode. It's filling out the season, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I'm there with you. It's a fine episode. I think that had we not seen this type of story in Shadowplay not so long before, I mean, Shadowplay season 2 of DS9, so it actually was, about 8 years in between these episodes, but those of us who love DS9 and watch it over and over, of course, it felt quite familiar. But maybe it would have had a bit more impact if it didn't seem so familiar. But I think if you set that aside and you just watch the story for what it is, and you realize that the point of the story is not the reveal that these people are holograms. The point of the story is Ezral doing the right thing as a father to give his daughter a life? He feels guilt of the crash. He's trying to do what's best for her. He thinks that he is, but is that really true? And that's the question of the episode. So if you look at it that way, I think it's a lot better than people tend to think. But yeah, it's still just an episode. So I'm going to give it 5 bowls of vanilla ice cream.
Well, and one thing I do just have to say, I think it's great that you mentioned that. The idea that he's doing what's best for him. And, you know, the question you kind of have to come to in this type of thing as well is like, okay, well, what's best for me might not be best for others involved. And, you know, so the fact that he can make that distinction between what's ultimately best for everyone is a good thing. And that's what real love is. Like, you're not just thinking about yourself. So,
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, before we jump into the closing, Matthew, I have one task for you as a fellow Ted Lasso fan. Because since we've been talking about Shadowplay, I went back and watched Shadowplay yesterday just to refresh my memory. And it struck me, as Odo has so much interaction with this little girl in Shadowplay, Odo and Roy Kent have very similar demeanors when they're talking to small children. So you need to go back and watch Shadowplay and imagine if they digitally replaced Odo with Roy Kent and how that episode would work.
Well, it would be a lot more F words, which would be
that's
hilarious.
The biggest difference.
Yes, but that's so funny. I'm imagining that now. That's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. All right. Well, we would love to hear your thoughts on Oasis. If you'd like to share those with us, there are many ways to do that. You can go to Facebook and join the Babel Conference. That's our closed listeners group. If you're not yet a member, it is a closed group, so please be sure to answer the questions and agree to the rules of the forum so that I can let you in. And if you want to find it, you're not yet a member, just search BABEL on Facebook, and it should come up. If not, just type the whole name, the Babel Conference. You can also send us an email if you would like. Go to our website, trek.fm/contact. Use the form there. Choose to send to a show. Choose Warp 5, and that'll come to Matthew and me by email. And of course, you can find us everywhere on social media, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, under the username TrekFM. Now, Matthew, when you're not trying to figure out if you're living in a simulation, where can people find you?
Well, you could find me all over the place under the name MattRushing02, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, all those type of places. Of course, here on the network with the 602 Club, which is our whole other side of the network, not devoted to Star Trek, but with every other fandom that we love. Of course, there's some bonus shows in that same feed as well that you can find. And Literary Treks, as well as The Orb. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And then, of course, Chris, you and I talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine on The Orb, which is a lot of fun. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got a completed show I did called Owlpost with Drea Kaufman, where we talk about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then John Mills and I are over there talking about Star Wars each and every week on Aggressive Negotiations. But Chris, when you're not trying to get yourself some resequenced ice cream, where can people find you?
I love that stuff. And Ben & Jerry's, they make the best resequenced ice cream. You can find me here on the network, of course, doing The Orb, which you mentioned, talking Deep Space Nine with you, popping in on Literary Treks from time to time. Larry Nemechek and I do the Ready Room now and then. There's Interphase, and of course, I'm on many, many episodes in the back catalog over the, what is it now, 11, 12 years we've been doing this network. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts on a wide range of Star Trek, just dig into the back catalog and you'll find me talking about all sorts of things. And then I'm working on behind-the-scenes things for the network as well, getting ready to roll some stuff out soon. And if you want to talk to me about Star Trek or Japan or anything, you can find me on Twitter. My username is CBryanJones, the letter C and Bryan with a Y. That's my username everywhere in social media, but Twitter is where I'm most active. And I'd love to hear from you there. And also, if you would like to help us keep all of this going, it takes a great deal of money to operate the network, and it's been a rough couple of years here through the pandemic. We could really use your support to get everything back on its feet. You can support us through Patreon. If you'd like to find out how to become involved in the network, just go to patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. patreon.com/trekfm to find out how. And I'd like to send a huge thank you to everyone who's supporting us right now. We could not do this without you, so thank you very, very much for your support. Well, Matthew, I'm going to go and break out my Quantum Leap box sets because we're getting the band back together next week as we talk about Detained.
Well, Chris, that sounds great to me, so let's go.